one of them. Yeah.
And then if you're crazy like I was, you can do it 3 times.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
This is a nice intimate room. I know who wins best sweater. which I bet you got on closeout here. Anybody wants to get deals on Vikings apparel? Should I sit? Yeah. Is it easier if I sit here for you guys?
Whatever you want to do.
Going with, we really like Rogers, so we've been here 8 years, love the community. I've got a 28-year-old who now lives in Plymouth, but I also have 2 toddlers. So, I believe in space. Stay-at-home mom.
Love it. Welcome. So
Thank
glad
you.
you're here.
Nice to
Your
meet you.
first name, I'm sorry?
Tanya.
Tanya. Thanks, Tanya.
I'm Yvonne Carlton. We've lived in Dayton for what, it'll be 2 years in March, but we've lived in the 3rd district for many years.
You don't have to say that many.
Yeah.
More than he has, are you trying to say?
I'm an election judge,
Oh, wonderful.
and beyond that, there's just the 2 of us. We have a daughter who lives in St. Michael. She just moved there last May. She was in Otsego before.
Terrific. Well, thanks for being here. And thanks for being an election judge.
Well, I'm Don Carlton, I can't, I'll just, whatever she said.
Well trained. Thanks for being here, Tanya.
I'm Denise Nord. I've lived in Rogers for 20 years, and I grew up in Brooklyn Center, so I didn't move too far away. And I've gotten a little more involved in things in the last year, and
Like a lot of us.
like a lot of us, and just thought I'd come and check things out.
I'm so glad you did. Thanks for being here.
I'm Dan Solon. I'm a Navy veteran, active drilling reservist for the Navy. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I've lived in Rogers for 2 years. We moved up here because my wife works at the Excel plant in Monticello.
What does she do there?
She's a nuclear instructor.
Wow. That beats rocket science.
It's just nuclear
Yeah,
science.
yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks for being here.
I'm David Holden, I'm from Maple Grove, and I thought I'd come up here for just a little warm-up before the chat down in Maple Grove Community Center later on with all 3 candidates. So, and I'm a 3-time House candidate, so I'm kind of familiar with the process, and but I'm no longer running, I'm just a avid volunteer and stuff.
That's why you're smiling.
I'm Neil Anderson. I've lived in Rogers about 17 years. And I live about 2 blocks down here now, so retired. Nothing else to do tonight, so.
We'll try to make it entertaining. Thanks for being here, Neil. And maybe my team could just introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. My name is Oswar. I'm Dean's digital engagement coordinator. So that's why I have a camera at the end. If you want to take a photo with Dean, I'm your guy.
No charge.
No charge.
I'm Zach Rodvold, Dean's campaign manager.
And I'm Ian. I am Dean Phillips, voter engagement coordinator on the northern side of the district. So Queen Rapids, Champlin, Grove, Rogers, Brooklyn Park, a little bit of Dayton, and a little bit of Plymouth. So, yeah.
So that's our team. Well, thank you all for being here, all of you. And I thought I'd start with telling you a little about myself, my background, and most importantly, why I'm doing this. And then very most importantly, to hear from you. I would love to hear what's on your minds, and since we have a small group, might as well just sit at the table and ask me anything that's on your minds. So I was born in St. Paul in 1969. My parents, Eddie and Artie, met at St. Paul Central High School in the mid-1960s. My dad, Artie, grew up quite poor in St. Paul and took an ROTC scholarship to attend the University of Minnesota. He was deployed to Vietnam in 1969 as a captain in the U.S. Army and was killed just a year later in July of '69 when, he was deployed in '68, he was killed in '69 when I was 6 months old. And my mom was 24 and widowed, and we moved in with my great-grandparents for the first 2.5, 3 years of my life. And when I was 3, my mother remarried Eddie Phillips, who adopted me, and into an extraordinary family, the Phillips family of great achievement and wonderful principles and philanthropy. Some of you might know my adopted grandmother was Dear Abby, the advice columnist. I'm not here to give you advice. I'm here to seek yours. But as a little boy, I grew up visiting her in a beautiful home in California, and my grandma Ruth in public housing in St. Paul. And I was subject to extraordinary disparities, and I've lived a very fine line between advantage and disadvantage, and in no small part why I'm doing this today. When I was adopted, we moved to Edina, where I grew up, playing hockey and going to Edina Highlands Elementary School. And my family taught me, my parents and grandparents, that hard work was important, and also that success is not to be measured by how much one collects, but rather how much one shares. And to that end, I worked hard as a young guy. Bus tables down at Runyon's, if you remember Runyon's in downtown Minneapolis. Opened my own mobile car wash service one year, and worked in a family print shop for a couple years as well. Went to school out east to Brown University, came home afterwards, and took one job at a startup company before going into our family business, where my first job as a full-time employee there was working in our warehouse, filling orders, and then in our production department, learning how to make schnapps, which I hope all of you enjoyed in moderation. And then I went to school on the weekends at the University of Minnesota, where I pursued my MBA and worked my way up the ladder, being named president of the company when I was about 30 years old in 2000. And our family has long believed that business is a means to an end. And the end is taking care of employees and taking care of the communities in which we do business. And that's what we did at Phillips. After that, we bought a small ice cream business called Talenti, if any of you had Talenti Gelato before, which we sold about a year ago. Took wonderful care of our employees when we did that. And now I'm the owner of a couple coffee shops called Pennies in the city. And I'm proud that we pay every single one of our employees $15 an hour minimum, not because it's easy. In fact, it's quite difficult, but it's the right thing to do. And I do believe strongly that those who work hard should be afforded a wage on which they can live. And that's a principle that's important to mine, and I try to reflect in my daily work. I'm running for Congress because I believe that the Constitution anticipated a president like Donald Trump. I do not believe the Constitution anticipated a Congress filled with so many who lack courage. And I believe Eric Paulson is one of those. Refuses to speak truth to power, refuses to host public town hall meetings, which I consider to be a fundamental responsibility of representation. And after that last election, I woke up the next morning, spoke with my teenage daughters, who are now 19 and 17, and I promised them I would participate. I wasn't going to be a complainer, that I would do something about it. And that's indeed why I'm running for Congress. I do so with the hopes of representing an entire district. I don't want to be a Democratic version of Eric Paulson. I spent a lot of my time driving around the district in my 1960 International Harvester truck, which some of you may have seen. I call it the government repair truck. And I do so because it creates conversation. And I drive to parts of the district that have never seen a candidate for Congress of any party. And the most joyful part of this pursuit is the conversations that ensue by pulling over and offering a cup of coffee to people who want to share what's on their mind. I believe this country is actually separated by far less than many would have us believe. And I learn that every day when I talk to people. Regardless if you're a Republican, a Libertarian, a Democrat, Independent, most of us, in fact I would argue just about every one of us, want the same outcomes. Better public schools, safer streets, less gun violence, safer, better national security, higher quality health care, and at a lower cost. These are truths that most people share, and it's actually converted some of my angst into hopefulness and optimism, which I'm pleased to share with you because I believe our best days are yet to come. And my campaign is about inspiring that conversation and listening and being a voice of reason. And I think Washington needs a little bit more of that, and that's why I'm doing this. With that said, no matter what your number one priorities are, whatever the issue is that's most important to all of you, I would ask you a favor in that you consider making your number two issue campaign finance reform. Because I believe that money in politics is corrupting, legalized corruption, I might add. It inspires members of Congress who accept money from lobbyists and from political action committees and many special interests. I believe it inspires too many members of Congress to vote on behalf of their donors rather than on behalf of their constituents. And we see this time and time again. It's not unique to one party or the other. In fact, there are only 6 members of Congress out of 535. 6. that refuse to accept money from PACs, special interest groups, and federal lobbyists. I intend to be lucky number 7. I don't take money from those groups because I want to be beholden to my own principles and those of the people that I represent. So campaign finance reform is amongst my foremost priorities. I would love to see the day when we establish a national voting holiday in this country to inspire engagement, where you can bring children, grandchildren, family, loved ones to the voting booth and explain to them why participation, civic engagement is important. I'd like to see the day when you can only invest in a candidate for whom you can vote. I don't like the fact that so much of the money flowing into these races, including our own, comes from interests and entities that have no interest in our lives or our district. And that, again, is true on both sides of the aisle. Right now we cap how much you can share with a candidate, how much you can contribute or donate, which is constitutionally legal. What we don't do, and I think is a possibility, and I want to advocate for, is capping how much campaigns can spend. By so doing, we will eliminate a lot of the nonsense that is propagated by members of both parties and candidates in both parties that I believe you, like me, are pretty sick of and tired of. So I want to make some strides in that area, and I want to be a strong advocate. I believe in health care for all. I believe that this country should make the moral choice to provide us a wonderful education, public education to all children in this country. And I believe we should provide health care when necessary to everybody in this country, regardless of their age or income or geography or condition. The question is how to get there. And I believe we are a country that is predicated on freedom and options and choice. And I believe the best way to pursue that path is to expand Medicare as an option for people to buy into, as a plan that would be offered to those who don't find private insurance accessible or affordable. And I believe that is an area where the government can be helpful and allow people like me who buy insurance now in the individual market to actually buy into a plan that I think can work quite well. I also believe that we must reduce the cost of care. And right now, we as a country provide incentives to hospitals to perform procedures. We provide very few incentives to prevent people from being sick in the first place. And I believe that would be a fundamental, important, and also achievable nonpartisan shift in policy. I also believe that we shouldn't be the country that subsidizes every single other country around the world in their prescription drug pricing. We pay more. We pay more than every single country in the world for our medicines. And I don't think that is appropriate. I think it can be addressed. And again, this is a nonpartisan principle. Right now, the VA negotiates pharmaceutical pricing and does so quite successfully. I believe Medicare should be afforded the same opportunity, and ultimately, we can achieve those results and improve quality, access, and care. I'm a strong proponent of public education. I believe that every child in this country should be afforded a world-class education. And way too often, we deny those opportunities to kids. Kids with needs that are across the spectrum. And I don't believe that this is a partisan issue. Because as I speak with people of all political perspectives, everybody agrees. And yet we find ourselves with too many districts around this country. We're blessed in the third, I would argue, with really, really good schools. Some better than others, but good schools. That is not true throughout this country. And I do believe we have a collective responsibility to enhance that. Those are a few of the top priorities that I'm listening to people share with me every single day that I find important, I intend to advocate for. I'm not someone who carries a magic wand and says I'm going to go to Washington and fix everything, but I do intend to be a good listener, a strong advocate, a voice of reason, and somebody who listens and represents everybody in this district. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to you and hear what's on your mind, and if you have ideas or opinions or questions, anything is, nothing's off the table, put it that way. So thank you. I'm really grateful that you would take some time out of your schedules, even if you live just 2 blocks away.
I'm kind of envious.
Yeah. And enjoy me. This is what makes campaigning a lot of fun, is meeting all of you, listening to your stories and perspectives, and that's what makes me hopefully a better representative one day. So thank you. So with that, anything to share? Any questions?
Well, I guess you mentioned that you didn't want to be the Democrat version of Mayor Paulson. And I guess, do you have any ideas on how you could do that and be more, I guess, moderate in what I think is a conservative district?
So, a couple things in your question. The answer is it's achievable by a number of means. One of which is I'm very independent-minded. I'm disappointed to some degree in both parties right now. I don't intend to be just a party hack, if you will. That's why I don't accept money from any organizations, only individuals. And I speak truth to power. I celebrate ideas from both sides. I don't want to just represent Democrats. I want to represent a district, people. I'm really sick of the divisiveness and the polarization and the labeling of people. The district is actually a very thoughtful, interesting, engaged district. It has voted for a Republican for this seat since 1958, but also voted for Barack Obama twice, for Hillary Clinton by 10 points, votes for Amy Klobuchar by landslide margins. It is a very thoughtful, very independent-minded district, which I believe is well matched to my sensibilities as well. What troubles me is the polarization of both parties and the leadership in both parties that demands adherence to the party line. And that is terribly, terribly inappropriate, I believe, and does all of us a disservice. George Washington, our first president, was not the member of a political party. I think he and many of our founding fathers would be dismayed by this state of affairs. So I intend to be someone who celebrates great ideas regardless of who develops them, what side of the aisle, and represents not just our district, but our state and our country, and ultimately we have a responsibility to represent this world. And in so doing, a lot can be achieved. And I believe it all starts with the money. Too many people are responsible to act on behalf of those who support them. Hey, everybody. Sorry we're late. Oh, that's right. I'll make my 20-minute speech once more time.
We can stand right back.
We'll stand.
So we have No.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
No, then I'll have to stand. No, please, have to join us. What are your names? In fact, we started by just introducing ourselves, so if you guys don't mind.
My name's Phil Olstrike.
Phil, okay.
Yep.
And I'm Sue Ostrike, and this is our son Sam. He is 15, so he can't vote.
Oh.
Well, he drugged
But-
along anyways.
Yeah.
But I bet you're on social media.
Yes. No, he actually is not.
Okay, oh, good.
Keep him on
Okay,
that.
good. All right, well, welcome, Phil, Sue, and Sam. And where do you live?
We live over in Dayton.
Wonderful. Thanks for being with us. So I just did a little introduction, which I can do a little more with you afterwards, but we're just sharing questions, ideas, perspectives, want to know what's on people's minds, and listening. And Dan just asked me about how I shared with everybody at the table that I don't intend to be a Democratic version of Eric Paulson. I want to represent everybody, and his question was, how can one do so? And at the end of the day, the answer is best summed up by the money in politics. Members of both parties have responsibilities to the organizations and the lobbyists that often support their campaigns. And I don't accept money from these lobbyists and from special interests or PACs, which I think affords me and the 6 other members of Congress who refuse those dollars to be more independent-minded. And I think we need more people like that from both sides of the aisle to represent us in Washington. So those are my intentions. And in my business career, I have achieved success not individually, but by aggregating, encouraging, and debating ideas from across spectrums, and not just amongst managers at our businesses. The best ideas often come from factory floors and from sales reps, and there's that same spirit I think can be shared in Congress and needs to, and that's how we tend to operate.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your sacrifice and service. And for wearing that suit. I was just
I'm proud of it.
I'll tell you a little funny story. My father, as a little boy, my dad Eddie took me to the last Viking Super Bowl in Pasadena in 1977. And he was friends with Alan Page, the former defensive player for the Vikes. And he said, and we rode back to the hotel in a car with Alan afterwards. My dad said, Dean, they just lost the Super Bowl, so don't say anything to him. So we get in the car, and Mr. Page turns to me and says, so what did you think of the game? And I stared with him blankly and didn't say a word. And my dad said, he just asked you a question. And I said, Dad, you told me not to talk. So whenever I see him to this day, we joke about that. But I was hoping this would be the year this all changed. Any questions, comments, ideas? What's on your minds? I'd love to hear.
I'll just speak for myself. The reason I came, and my number one issue, and I realize this isn't all about me or my family, but our number one issue is that until 3 years ago, we were just floating by with wonderful private insurance. We still have that wonderful private insurance. Never, when Medicare came up, it's not an issue to me. I'm gonna be how old before I collect Medicare? Why would I even really pay attention? And our 3-year-old, he's what, 3.5 now, at 2.5 was diagnosed with severe autism, as well as global developmental delay. And going through, I mean, that's a whole process to get on waiting lists and to, thankfully in Minnesota, we're very fortunate that I believe that we have a lot more resources for these children than other states, and that we're closer to the metro. We're fortunate, very fortunate that we got him into St. David's.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Got in the list in December and he got accepted and started in August. And the progress we have made has been phenomenal. He never even would respond to his name. And now he does.
How old is he now?
He is 3.5. He's nonverbal. He wouldn't even make eye contact. And now he'll make the eye contact. So just in these very few short months. And the only reason he's able to be at St. David's is because of, we are on what's called medical assistance, TEFRA. We were never aware of what this even was. We make way too much money to be on medical through the government. We still have that private insurance, but they're not gonna pay for autism treatment. And so based on our income, we pay for that every month. And it's not cheap. So when people complain about that, I get real frustrated thinking we pay 4 figures every month to be able to have this for our child. So I just wanted to meet you and explain how important it is. It's not just people even that are down on their luck or people that are making minimum wage. It's us whose husband makes good money, but circumstances are the circumstances. And just to be able to get him that quality therapy, quality education. And I will say this, he's also enrolled at the preschool, special ed preschool here with the school district. Very pleased. We can't say one complaint about the teachers and staff through the school district. So really having a good time there. But I just wanted to share from our family what that Medicare means to us.
I'm so glad you did. Thank you. And as you all know too, we have a federal mandate to provide public education to every child, regardless of needs. And right now, the government has an obligation to fund 40% of special needs education in this country. Right now, it hovers around 15%. Just in our district alone, I think it's about $147 million annually of unfunded federal mandates that have to be made up with local budgets. And as you share your story, I reflect on that, how many families need those resources, and I believe it's time to advocate for those. So I want you to know that advocating for fully funding IDEA is one of my foremost priorities.
I appreciate that. I also have to share this ironic story. You do a pre-meeting before your son or daughter starts at St. David's. And so we went in with the staff to meet. Beautiful room, set up. Whose name do you think was on the outside placard that paid for it? United Healthcare, which is our private insurance that won't cover St. David's. I'm like, oh, so you bought a room. Isn't that lovely of you? Thank you, United Healthcare.
Thanks.
You gotta laugh, because what else are you gonna do? It's so
Enjoy
silly. How
the
silly.
room.
Exactly.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Anything? I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I'll throw out something about the healthcare situation, and I've had a lot of chat with many people through a number of years. I've had lots of individual kind of bouts with the healthcare system, but when you get on Medicare, those of us that are there realize we're still all purchasing additional coverage, at least most of us are. If you don't, you're gonna be stuck with minimum 20% of your bill whenever you go in for anything. So this idea that if we change, or even if we move to changing this whole system away from what I was used to years ago when I had good, strong company coverage, et cetera, to thinking about the whole, well, I mean, if you put everybody on a Medicare for all mentality, but it didn't cover everything, and then you had that extra 20%, well, I don't know about the rest of the people that are out there, but you know, we're sitting here paying $108 a month, each one of us right now, for supplemental, and we think that that's a pretty reasonable cost for what it, you know, what is covering. I mean, if everybody had to do that just to try to make, you know, kind of fill out all of those gaps, the insurance companies are not gonna go out of business tomorrow because we changed the system. And that's been a big argument that I've heard from some of my more conservative friends on that aspect, is that, oh, you know, you can't do this because we have all of these big insurance companies, and what are you gonna do with all the employees and that kind of stuff, that it's gonna just eliminate all those jobs. And I would say, well, it's gonna create maybe they're gonna have to figure out how do we redo this whole thing. But you got a lot of people that, you know, would be buying even if, you know, they don't have to, or they could make a choice not to, but they're still gonna probably purchase insurance. So I think that there's, you know, to say that we can't get anywhere is just kind of, because I happen to have good insurance or don't at that time, it's just really, it's very short-sighted. And, you know, it could be you or anybody, you know, you run into a situation like that, and until it comes home, you don't really think about it.
It's very humbling.
Well, of course it is.
I almost feel arrogant on how I looked at it, or at least naive, how I looked at it prior to this, to coming to our front door.
Sure.
Hey, Dean,
Yeah.
quick question for you. Yeah, obviously Europe and, you know, Australia and Canada have had some success stories regarding healthcare, what they do, which is different. What kind of lessons do you think that this country can draw upon our European folks, people in Canada, that can perhaps benefit our country from a healthcare perspective?
A great question. I think, you know, my answer begins with recognizing that just like I celebrate ideas from both sides of the aisle, we should celebrate ideas from around the world. And you know, we pay double, just about double, what the rest of the developed world pays for their care. 18% of our economy is consumed by healthcare, yet our outcomes are often mid-pack. There are plenty of countries around the world where their outcomes are better than ours and they pay less. So I'm a fan of efficiency and value, and others do it better than we do in many cases. That's one way to learn from it. I believe that our current system can be enhanced. I don't see a system around the world that I think that this country can transition to in a heartbeat. I believe that people should be afforded choices. And I'll tell you, there's an analogy, I think, in this case, relative to, bless you, to public education. You know, we're a country that in a very nonpartisan fashion celebrates public education. We consider it a very American principle. I'd like to see the same in healthcare. Afford healthcare to everybody who needs it. And to your point, David, many enhance that. Just as many go to public schools and some choose private schools or parochial schools or charter schools. You know, we are a country predicated on those freedoms to choose. You know, I believe we sometimes have a responsibility to fill in gaps when people are not afforded those options. That is what I've learned. But I think, and I haven't talked a whole lot about the delivery of care in this country, but before you walked in, I reflected on how our system is predicated on rewarding procedures, not on rewarding prevention. And that is a significant and very meaningful shift that is celebrated again by members of both parties, because it's analogous to early childhood education. Art Rolnick presented research some years ago that very well quantified how much we would save down the road if we made investments in children in the very beginning of their lives. And the same is true in healthcare. If we invested in prevention, we would ultimately have a system that costs less. And that is my personal mandate, is how do we improve quality and reduce costs. And nobody has a monopoly on ideas. I don't think there's a healthcare system in the world that is perfect. And I think that it's high time that we start investigating and benchmarking and ultimately providing the best healthcare in the entire world to everyone in this country. What else is on people's minds?
Just to pick up on the healthcare thing, I work in the electrical industry. I work for a company that's headquartered out in Plymouth.
Which company is?
J.H. Larson.
Oh, okay.
And I've been in the industry for, 30-some years. But my healthcare, I'm single, went up 30% for this year, my insurance.
30%?
30%. So at this point, I'll be $6,000 out of pocket before, once I pay premiums and my deductible. Luckily, I don't ever have to use it hardly, knock on wood. But that was a huge jump,
30%.
That was a huge premium jump. And it's a, mid-sized company, they're not a huge company, and it's based on, the employees there, what they've paid out in the last couple of years, and things, all the uncertainties that are going on, so.
Yeah, which is uncertainties.
Uncertainties, I think, is a huge part of it. And I can afford it, that's not the issue, but that was a big chunk of change, so.
I recognize that, those who do not currently have care, we have to find ways to provide that access. And for those who have care, we have to find a way to reduce the costs. It's out of control and not sustainable, I would argue. And I hear this, I travel with the district in my little truck, and I hear this from family after family and individual after individual, that many are just one illness away from bankruptcy, even with coverage. As we all know, not every plan covers everything we need them to. So I'm glad you shared. I hear it every single day, and that's part of what I don't intend to be a politician. I want to be a representative. The only way to do so is to hear these stories every single day and start recognizing patterns. And boy, healthcare and the cost of healthcare and insurance is on everybody's priority list. So I hear you.
My mom passed away 7 years ago, and she was in a nursing home who had a lot of care. I helped a lot with reviewing her bills and everything. It was very amazing to me to see what the hospital billed, what Medicare paid for, what her insurance covered. And it's like, if you didn't have insurance, you're liable for this humongous number that's over here. Medicare paid a lot less money, and then the rest of it just kind of goes away. I mean, she still had bills she had to pay, but it was a huge difference. The hospital would bill $100,000 for something, Medicare would pay $35,000. And then she would have to, her insurance would cover some more, and she'd pay for some as well. That was kind of an eye-opener.
Yeah, you hate to be that person with no coverage. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, if you don't have any coverage, you're liable for that big number.
Everything.
Well, right, and why are they charging that to the person who's uninsured? But because I have health insurance and they can negotiate a price down, why are they not charging what it costs and what they can still make a profit in? It's not a voluntary market. I don't enter into healthcare because I want to. I do it because I'm sick and I need care. So why are they charging so much? Why are they allowed
So,
to?
as you all probably know, it's negotiated. And you bring up something interesting. I don't believe we have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. If we had a healthcare system, we would invest in health and prevention instead of just treating sickness. That's one. Another thing you just said, Denise, the ACA is not perfect. It needs to be fixed. There's a bipartisan group in Washington that has some thoughtful resolutions to in the reinsurance area to limit these increases in premiums, and it has to be addressed. There's a lot of conversation about how we're going to fix healthcare. I'm very much focused on the here and now. And there are millions of people who do have coverage that cannot afford these increases every year. And then back to your question, Dan. The way that the system works, it's kind of like flying on an airplane or staying in a hotel. You might be sitting next to somebody or staying next to somebody who's paying half the price as you, and it's all based on negotiations, depending on the plan in which you're the beneficiary and how big and what kind of negotiating power they have, that dictates your price. That's why I'm an advocate for the expansion of Medicare as an option to buy into. The more people that do, the more leverage that Medicare has to negotiate pharmaceutical pricing and to negotiate the cost of care. That's how we can perhaps better manage the cost of care, which is what private insurers are doing as well. I mean, let's be honest. They're in the business of trying to provide value, and they do so by negotiating the cost with health systems. There is room for everybody in this system, if you ask me. My mandate is to look after those who are voiceless and don't have advocates and don't have access, and that's my intention. Other thoughts, questions?
What do you think about the gerrymandering case that just went through the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania?
And North Carolina.
And North Carolina, and the potential that they could go further. But
Yeah.
also, we're looking at redistricting in another 2 years. Well, it's gonna be happening actually before that, but, so that would be a big issue that Congress would be facing, et cetera, the potential of doing that. I mean, how do we fix that? Because there's plenty of Democrats as well as Republicans that they love their way their districts are drawn because they're gonna get reelected every time. And at the end of the day, it's like, really, you know, you have to try to represent everybody, and it's like, if they only, you know, if they're 80%, I mean, look at Minneapolis, it's a great example. I mean, I'd hate to be a Republican running in an inner cities precinct or district or something like that. They're never gonna get elected, the way the lines are drawn up right now.
I agree.
So how do we deal with,
Right, but it's really more than just that, it's, we've gerrymandered ourselves.
That's what I'm
With
s-
the way people have been moving over the last.
Self-selecting, sure.
Yep, we have self-selected some of.
and I'm not
the
saying
issues.
districts don't maybe
Yeah.
have to be
Right, but they,
shaped strangely, but
Right.
the way they do these things, I mean, it's
Yeah.
obviously, and it kind of depends on who's in control,
Indeed.
it seems like.
I'm in
Very
favor, to answer your question, and I grouped this question under campaign finance, reformation, and disenfranchisement, and how we engage people. And I concur, you know, there are districts, both red and blue, that do not do this country a service. I think it's fair to say that most of us would agree that having competitive districts is in everybody's best interest. That's where good ideas come out, and that's where you work hard and campaigning and meeting people and doing what you gotta do. Having uncompetitive districts doesn't do this country a service. And I think we should look into nonpartisan committees or commissions that do the redistricting that is designed to create competitive districts. That's in the best interest of this country. And I think by definition, we will generate more candidates who are thoughtful, engaged, moderate in perspective, and can actually get things done in Congress. You know, there's not a singular effort that will fix everything. It's a collective effort, and you know, I intend to be someone who advocates for these things. And I celebrate both parties. Thoughtful people in both parties should be celebrated. We should stop the antagonism. And we should start doing so by encouraging districts that are competitive. And I'm pleased that the 3rd is one of the very last in this country, one of the very last that truly is a swing district, that typically votes for people in both parties on the same ticket. And that is actually to be celebrated. And that generally produces moderate, thoughtful representation. And I think we should focus very much on that. And I was pleased to see the results of those lawsuits, and I hope that we can affect some change in that area, because it's you know, the money and the gerrymandering, in my estimation, are far more threatening to our democracy than any president could ever be, because we are well positioned to manage a wayward president, generally, with the Congress who had some courage, but not so much with the gerrymandering and the money, and that has to be addressed. I call it the influence of affluence, and it has to change.
Yeah, you'd almost have to think it'd have to change from the very top at the federal level, because right now, there isn't a heck of a lot of legislation out there that discusses or covers gerrymandering. I mean, everything goes to the Supreme Court. It's a litmus test at that point, which is why you see these lawsuits, because the Supreme Court then has to take a look at the constitutionality, whether it's state or federal level. But, I mean, it's an undertaking. I'm just making a comment, and you can weigh in the way you want to on this, but to me, it would seem quite the undertaking to have some sort of legislation that in a very surgical way addresses gerrymandering to the point where you can't put the fix in. It has to meet certain criteria, whether it be geographical squares that you put on a map by population size and leave it at that, or whether you do it a different way. But you're right. I mean, everybody's right. I mean, in Pennsylvania, this has been long going, and in North Carolina as well. You look at the districts, and you can tell it's demographically focused. Completely.
And I would argue it's in both parties' interest too. This is, if you look at demographics, no party has a monopoly on success, as we all know. And the pendulum swings widely back and forth. It's in the country's best interest to affect it. And again, there are too many money-vested interests that like the system the way it is. There are too many of them. And as long as they are afforded that access and those quid pro quos and that influence, how in the world should we expect any
And Citizens United.
Well, of course, which I'm not an attorney. I didn't go to law school, so I cannot opine on the constitutionality of that decision. But I can opine on the outcome, which has been terribly destructive, I think, for this democracy. And as a candidate, I can assure you, it's even more appalling. And again, it's not just Republicans that take advantage of it, it's Democrats too. The amount of money that will be poured into this race by independent expenditures that are financed by these, by dark money on both sides, is abhorrent. And allows candidates to wipe their hands of anything negative by letting the people,
Do their bidding.
do the bidding, exactly. And allowing candidates to only present their charming selves and entrusting the mean-spiritedness to others is not in the best interest of this country.
So how are you gonna beat Eric Paulson?
Thank you.
Because this is a very
Yes.
red district. I mean, it really is. Although 9% more voted to him for Hillary Clinton
Yes.
versus, but 14% more voted for Eric Paulson.
Sure. Well, I'll
How
tell
do
you.
you hit that window there?
Yeah, I'm gonna make it worse before I make it better. We haven't elected a Democrat to the seat since 1958.
Yeah,
Right?
it's been a long time.
Only 35% of the district identifies themselves as Democrats. But Barack Obama won the district both times. Hillary Clinton won,
Yep.
and Amy Klobuchar
Yep.
wins in like landslide margins. Eric Paulson has presented himself as a thoughtful moderate. That's how he's represented himself, because he knows that this is
Not how he votes.
So I'm gonna get to this. So, and he's coasted by for many, many years with this reputation. Why? Because he's able to raise a lot of money and use the media to perpetuate this image of being a moderate and be thoughtful and to represent moderate perspectives. But as we have seen, the facts indicate that there's been a distinct rightward migration, especially since Donald Trump has become president. Eric Paulson has voted with the Trump agenda 98% of the time. I think he's in the top 2 members of the Congress in voting for the Trump agenda. He won an award from an organization that was opposed to the right for everybody to marry. These are truths that are incongruent with the general perspectives of this district. So my responsibility and what we intend to do is to simply tell the truth. I believe in truth and I believe in justice. And the truth is, he misrepresents himself. And he misrepresents a district that actually begs for a different representation. So these are truths that we will intend to point out. And we will do so aggressively and thoughtfully, using tactics that have never been employed before, with a team of extraordinary people that have never been afforded the opportunity to do the things we're about to do. We've raised $1.2 million in just 3 quarters, which is more than I believe any congressional challenger has ever raised in Minnesota at this stage. And we've done so only from individuals, because I don't take money from PACs and lobbyists. 3,500 people have sent in 5,000 contributions. We have 300 volunteers. We're going to be setting up a mobile office in every single community in this district, so people can come visit me, like you all are, without having to pay for it. Eric Paulson just last week hosted a little dinner at Crave, yet had to spend $2,700 or $1,000 to attend the dinner, to have FaceTime with him. Yeah, we've seen copies of the letter.
I like Crave, but not that much, but.
You only spent $500. This is what dismays me, because this is how it typically is done. We're going to do it differently, but that means that I'm still one person, no matter how much money we raise or how great of a message or what great tactics we have. Ultimately, it takes people like you who might believe in the same principles and want to see the same change and outcomes. I need to enlist you. So you ask how we're going to do it? We're going to do it by showing up in places that no candidates tend to show up in, by asking people and extending invitations to people who have not been asked before. And I anticipate doing the same with all of you. I want you to join this team if you'd be so kind and inspired. And we're going to do so using principle. I am disgusted about the tenor and tone in politics. We will be aggressive when necessary. We will be thoughtfully tactical all the time. I will never be mean-spirited, because that is contrary to my disposition. I anticipate he will, because it is not contrary to his and theirs. And we will win by working harder and showing up and listening better. I can't wait. And the greatest challenge will be to get him to show up, because he has proven time and time again that by not having town halls and not showing up in public and not answering questions, but by raising a lot of money and presenting a lovely image on television, that people think they're getting what they see. So how do we dissuade people of that truth? That's up to all of us. And I'm hopeful, and I believe in this district, that we recognize it's time for a change. Here's somebody who's been at this for 30 years, 10 of them in Congress, very little to show in the way of leadership, very little to show in the way of courage, and I think the district is ready for a change. And I'm not going to do so, like I said, maybe before you walked in, as a Democratic version of Eric Paulson. I really, really love everybody in this district. And I have a wonderful, extraordinary, actually, number of Republicans already supporting our campaign, who are challenged by Donald Trump representing their party right now, who are challenged by some of Eric Paulson's recent votes, even as Republicans, on this tax bill, adding $1.5 trillion to the national debt as a fiscal conservative. I mean, come on.
He's campaigning on that vote.
I hope he does more.
Yeah.
Because he's violated the core tenets of the Republican principles in many cases, including privacy with the FCC, and the notion that ISPs can sell our browsing searches because of a vote that he took to essentially afford that is deeply troublesome to Republicans. Yet he protects this president's tax returns time and time and time again. So there's plenty to work with, and we will have to generate the resources to do so. We will, and I'm very optimistic about November. Best of all, we're 4 points ahead of him in the first poll that was released, which is a darn good start to a campaign that now has 10 months to go.
How do we get him to debate you? How do we get him to fight you? You know, I mean,
Yeah,
seriously, I mean, have you guys been thinking about, how you can get that to happen? Call the media, get somebody to make the ask? Because we just don't see it in the congressional races. The incumbent's a chicken. They don't show up. And, nobody wants to, they only do it on a national level. And even so, I doubt that, the next election, if Trump is running, he's gonna be in all the debates because, he's just so afraid of losing. But what's your thought?
I think first and foremost, I believe to be a responsibility of representation to show up publicly. I mean, it's as simple as that. This is someone who chooses not to because I think it serves his personality and his success well. Ultimately, you have to rely on the human beings and residents of the district to be enlightened and care and demand it. If we don't demand that showing up and that presence and that responsibility, then we'll continue to be represented by someone who acts like that. I do believe that he will ultimately debate, and I hope it is me. I relish, nothing excites me more than being on a podium with Eric Paulson in a debate, you can imagine. I believe he'll do so, I believe he'll have to. I think incumbents who always have an advantage, if their polling indicates that they're far ahead, they have less of an incentive to debate. If the data shows that either I or another candidate is in the lead or it's a close race, that is a little bit more inspiration to show up. But I'll tell you what, if he doesn't, we will use that as leverage, as a demonstration of what's wrong with him and his representation. At the end of the day, it is his choice. And I'd like to think that by doing the right thing, people will be responsive. But you gotta remember, everybody, a lot of people don't pay attention until a couple weeks before an election.
Right,
You are an engaged, unique, and thoughtful group of people. That is not true of everybody. That said, as I think you reflected on when you came in, a lot of people didn't care until November of 2016. And what I'm seeing is an army of people who are engaged and care and passionate and joining together to participate. And that excites me. So if we demand showing up, we'll get people to show up. And I've already committed to holding 4 public, well-publicized town halls throughout the district every single year. And not just because it's the right thing to do, but primarily because I love it. Preaching to the converted is darn boring, everybody. Hearing people disagree with you is actually the most inspiring and important and frankly joyful part of this entire journey. And I relish that. I wish he did too. So I can't speak for him, but I can certainly encourage him.
So you have some DFL challengers, though?
Yes.
So do you guys all get together and talk in a public forum?
Yeah, in fact, I'm so glad you asked.
Yes.
Tonight in Maple Grove is the final DFL candidate forum for the 3rd District before the caucuses on February 6th.
Okay.
From 6:30 to 8:30, if you're so inclined. We've had a number of these thoughtful forums. I've had coffee with the other candidates, and they're good guys. We as Democrats are very like-minded in terms of our values and the outcomes we want to see. And I frankly would say that most of the Republicans I speak with are equally like-minded in the outcomes we want to see. Perhaps we diverge a little bit on tactics, but these are truths. And we've had a very thoughtful campaign so far. Tonight will be the last forum before the caucuses, and I think they've made me a better candidate. I hope I've made them better candidates. And having competition is good, plain and simple. And back to the gerrymandering question and engagement question, the more candidates that participate in this process and more people that show up at little events like this and big ones like forums and caucuses, the better off our democracy is. So I celebrate that competition. And in my business experience, competition has always made us better, as does competition in politics. And that's why I wish more districts were competitive, because it would produce candidates and elected officials who are more thoughtful. And Brian Santamaria and Adam Jennings are the two others seeking the DFL endorsement, and they're good men who I consider wonderful human beings and seeking to effect the same change that many of us in this room want to see.
They're not out like you are they?
I'll let you.
I've been to Rogers.
Probably haven't been to Rogers yet. Yeah. And I think I'll tell you what. If there is a difference between them and me, I think it is, in my perspective, that I don't want to just extend invitations to independents, Republicans, and libertarians because it's pragmatic. I want to do so because it's the right thing to do. And I'm tired of representation by others who don't represent me. So therefore, why should I run to represent others? And I don't know if my fellow candidates see it the same way. But that is, I present the same dean today as I will during a general election, and as I will as an elected member of Congress. And that, frankly, is very liberating, and part of my independent mindedness. Not every Democrat feels the same way, and I respect that too.
I did have an issue that's kind of important to me. Having joined the military after high school, I was a nuclear machinist mate in the Navy, and then I was a recruiter for 3 years, and I was recruiting people to join the military after high school. Vocational training, job training is really important to me, and I know in Minnesota we have historically low unemployment, but there's still hundreds of skills jobs that are not being filled. And from my perspective, being military, being a recruiter, I think a lot of parents, families, educators, they put a lot of importance on going to college specifically to become successful. And with my wife being a nuclear operator, she was in the Navy as a nuclear electrician, being successful. I know that you can be highly successful without going to college. So what can we do to get more people out of high school into career paths where they get the technical training for the technical jobs that don't need bachelor's degrees, but they just need you to get this certification?
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring this up. In fact, I came just before joining you all here. I took a tour of the IBEW training facility, the electricians training facility in St. Michael, which is an extraordinary facility. I'll tell you, having toured a number of the trades training facilities, I've been blown away by what opportunities exist in the community and how few people know about them. To your point, electricians can make $100,000 a year, and we have demand for them, and painters and carpenters and plumbers. And as a culture, somehow we have indicated to many generations that the only way to succeed is through a college degree, and that is not the truth. I also think that requires bigger and more efficient investments in public education so that people are prepared for whatever path they choose, better perhaps than many are right now. So that said, I intend to be a very passionate advocate for encouraging those career paths. And I've already shared with some of the trades better ways I think that they can attract high school age kids to pursue those paths. And people looking for a second or third career in many cases. Many just don't know that these opportunities exist. And these facilities are world class. So I hear you. And most of all, there is an extraordinary demand for these people right now. And matching them with these opportunities is terribly important. It's also, I think, an opportunity to solve some of our more urban social ills, where too many students either don't graduate or when they do, are met with nothing but dead ends. And I think we have a communal responsibility to provide opportunity. We can't guarantee outcomes, but we certainly can do better at providing opportunity. And to your point, that's one way to do so. And relative to college, those who do choose to go to college, I'm terribly troubled by the financial burden that many have upon graduation. And depending on what you study and what job you get afterwards, it can be lifelong burdens. And we have to recognize that and find ways to lighten that burden and afford pathways to generate wonderful young educators and machinists and plumbers and philosophers and business people, and we can do it. And this also means we have to open our eyes to the rest of the world, Jeff, as you were saying, to see how others do it. The state of New York, Governor Cuomo, and the state of New York have now passed legislation that is going to afford 2- and 4-year SUNYs, State University of New York, educations to children from families in New York who earn less than $125,000 a year, with some attachments to it. I think you have to work in New York for some years after your degree and so on and so forth. But it's something that I celebrate. It's a state testing an idea. If it works, we should replicate it. As we should do the same in healthcare and other policies. Let states test ideas, tweak them, make some mistakes, correct them, learn from them, and then replicate those. So those are some of my thoughts on education, and I wholeheartedly agree. Lots more out there. Only by running for Congress have I discovered how much opportunity there is that simply needs to be elevated, exposed, and shared, which is really one of the joys of what I'm doing right now, and I can't wait.
Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, I by your questions, I learn what's on your minds. If you have ideas after I share my perspectives about how we can better accomplish some of these ends and outcomes, I hope you'll share with me, including what you just asked about pathways. Because I don't know it all, and I'll be one of the few, hopefully elected people in Congress who is willing to admit that he doesn't know it all.
That's the reason I came.
Sorry to break the truth.
Sandy doesn't have a magic wand.
Yeah, I know. Two terrible disappointments. I know, honesty is such a bummer. Any other questions or thoughts?
What are your thoughts on climate change?
Well, I believe it's real.
Good, good.
I believe in science. I'll tell you, this is a. I really, when I talk to young people, and I spend a lot of time with high school and college age people, and it's interesting how the issues that are on people's minds, of course, differ based on the demographics. And many young people say, if you don't address climate change, nothing else you talk about really matters to us. And I do feel it's a responsibility to every generation that has enjoyed the blessings of our, especially here in Minnesota, of our environment, to ensure that it's protected and perpetuated. And the climate is changing. It is true. And I do believe in science. I do believe that humans have played a role in it. I also believe humans can play a role in solving it. And I say to many that we didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. We left the Stone Age because we came up with better ideas on how to do things. And I just came from this training facility, the electrician's facility, and so much of their focus is now on solar because it's the least expensive way to generate energy. We're becoming so much more efficient. Minnesota is not that far behind Florida in our sunlight and capacity to generate solar power. We need to migrate from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable energy economy. And Xcel Energy is a perfect example of an entity that is retiring coal plants, not just because it's good for the environment, because it actually makes economic sense. Because we are developing new ways to produce energy for all of us that is renewable and more thoughtful to the environment. So those are some of my perspectives. It has to. This is not, there's no difference between most Republicans' perspective on this issue and most Democrats' perspective. There's, especially Minnesotans. I talked to guys who are out fishing on Lake Minnetonka, ice fishing. I talked to, Teddy Roosevelt conservationists. I talked to far left liberal environmentalists. And at the end of the day, it's remarkable on how everybody feels the same way. We have a responsibility to keep our environment clean and do better for our children. So I'm sick of this polarization based on non-truths. The truth is, most people actually agree. unfortunately, a lot of very vested interests.
Yes, yes.
A lot of vested
That's
interests
what's doing it.
do well by dividing us, by promoting that division, and by investing in those who are willing to propagate that division. And that has to change. And I'm going to bring a lot of this back to the money in politics. Whether it is fossil fuel economy and migrating to clean energy. There's some vested interests that spend tens of millions of dollars to maintain the status quo. You know who they are, and you know who they finance, including Eric Paulson. So when votes come on the floor, who are they going to serve? The people in the district who share $5 or $100, and no, they take care of the ones that are sharing millions of dollars with candidates just like themselves, and they protect the status quo, even though they know what's in the best interest of people in the whole earth. That's true in pharmaceuticals, that's true in petroleum and energy, that's true with guns. We know it. And it's our job to thoughtfully expose it. And we can. But I'm one voice, and I'll be a loud one, darn it, but I need you all to be a chorus on these subjects.
Dean, the one thing that I would like you to do if you get into Congress is to really talk about public information, what has been done on the government websites now, what the Trump administration has done to cover up data from the public to see, because it doesn't fit their narrative. That would be one thing that I would like to see you do, and I don't see enough of that from the Democrats right now. There's some screaming about it, but there's not a lot being done about it. And to me, I think there should be an affirmative obligation for the government and its agencies. When they have data, they have tests, and they have results, they need to keep it on the websites for people to see. That's how you have an informed public. That's how you have an intelligent public that can make their decisions, to make their recommendations. When you start from that level of depriving people of that information, is literally you're depriving the brain of oxygen, so to speak. And that's where I'd like to see you guys go.
Thank you.
I don't see enough of that, but I'd like to see that.
Transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. Accountability, I like.
I'm one who believes that, as a Democrat, that our three core principles should be truth, should be justice, and opportunity for all. They're distinct, they're actionable, and one of the great threats to all of us right now is the inability to discern truth. And when you cannot trust your government, especially in this country, my goodness, did any of you ever grow up thinking that you couldn't trust? I'm appalled for a whole host of reasons, and transparency is a responsibility of a democratic government. And government is not them, it's us. My goodness, we are the ones that send people to represent us in Congress, 535 people, and in the president and administration. That responsibility falls on us. So I'm tired of casting blame on them. That's why I'm doing this. So to your point, yes, and transparency is a responsibility. And again, Republicans want the same thing. Republicans want transparency in government. It's one of the core principles too.
The ones that aren't in office.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I hear you, and I'll tell you, that's between news media and government websites and literature. There is a gap in trust right now in this country that has to be rectified, and the only way to do so is by electing people, I think, who represent those principles and demanding it. And I tend to be one of those. And thanks for advocating for that.
Yeah.
Well, there does seem to be the idea that has been forgotten, that politicians work for us.
Indeed.
They're not in charge of us.
I think there's
They're
something.
their employers, so to speak.
I think there's something that happens though, Denise. I think a lot of decent people go to Washington, D.C. and get sucked up and eaten up by the system.
I'm sure.
And the system centers around money. And the system centers around the desire to be perpetually reelected. And once you fall into that trap and your foremost priority becomes reelection rather than service, all bets are off. And
So that brings up term limits.
it brings up at least the conversation that we should investigate ways to limit the power of incumbency and celebrate transition of ideas and leadership. Again, but I keep going back to both parties. Both parties, I think, are devoid of thoughtful, inspired new leadership, which is in the country's best interest. And term limits are something I think can be investigated. I think it's part and parcel of the campaign finance reform. We obviously have a term limit on the President of the United States. You know, I'm appalled when I see members of Congress who've been serving literally decades. Decades. I don't care what party they represent. You know, that stifles engagement. And I'm a candidate now. You know, candidates need opportunities to serve. And when there are 2 senators and a handful of members of the House in most states, you know, those opportunities are limited. And when incumbency allows for perpetual service, that's a big problem for our country. And that I believe, in fact, I've heard Eric Paulson make some remarks in early speeches before he was going to Congress, that he didn't like the fact that so many had been there for as long as he had been alive at that time. Well, now he's been there for 5 terms, and I think that is plenty. If for no other reason, let's afford some new blood, right? And that's healthy for everybody in every state and every district in this country. So that's something I think can be looked at, but I also believe in freedom, and I believe that we should have the right to vote for whom we want, generally. So I think we have to be very thoughtful about when we change, long-standing elements of the system that I believe has served our country extraordinarily well, and is being tested right now. There's no question it's being tested, but I have great faith in our, how our founding fathers and founding mothers set up our country and the Constitution. And I think we will make it through this test, and we will be more inspired, and we got a wake-up call, and we're going to do better because of it. I think we're going to look back and consider this an awakening.
We got time for one more.
One more.
That's all right.
Oswar's always the party pooper.
This is my time.
Any other thoughts or questions, or anything you'd like to see or want me to advocate for?
Well, maybe one style. You said earlier that you're not going to be mean-spirited. That's good. But I think the Democrats lack street fighter instincts. I mean, they get bashed, and they sit back and huddle somewhere, and they let it go. Then things get better. They're the first ones to give each other a group hug. I think that they just lack the street fighting instinct. I tell Ivana all the time when she listens to me that I'm waiting to pour her if I can do it.
I know.
You have to have a situation where people do critical thinking, but when people aren't doing that, there has to be some position where somebody fights back. You don't hear from Amy Klobuchar right now on anything. Franklin is kind of off to the side, and we can have a debate of whether that's a good thing or not a good thing, but they're in the background. They're silent. They're not doing anything about this stuff with the tax structure, the tax cut that they put into play.
Yeah,
That's not going to go to very many of us who can do the math and look at your finances. Don't let them kid you. It's not going to be there. I put in phone calls to the Eric Paulson group as Yvonne wrote letters to these people, and I explained to them that I don't think Eric Paulson has the credentials to be so much ahead of trying to write what these rules are. So what's his credentials? I would pick out 15 business people that I know that have stronger credentials than he does to do that. And these people, one hung up on me, another person says I'm gonna have to give you to an intern to talk to from now on. And Yvonne doesn't even get a phone call return.
No, or letters.
Or letter return.
See, I can't make him quit sending me letters.
Oh, no.
Asking for money though, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
So I think if there's something from a style or something inside the gut, there's gotta be a time when you gotta be a street fighter with the group.
I will be relentlessly aggressive with truth. That does not mean or beg for mean-spiritedness. I'm inspired to try to.
A little bit would be fine.
Look, this is bigger than me in this race, this district, or even the state. This is about how we conduct ourselves in our national discourse and service and celebration of service. And you're right. There's some times where I wish that the Democratic Party wasn't necessarily more street fighter inspired, but more strategic and more relentless and more invitational. Because thank goodness we live in a democracy where fighting is that at the core of success?
Or even more vocal though.
Invitation,
Right.
invitation and inspiration, and frankly, this is a party that has long been devoid of that inspiration and sound leadership and thoughtful strategies and methodologies to achieve success. I would argue the Republican Party we can learn from in that respect, there's no question. Does that beg for mean-spiritedness? No. I want to win in a principled fashion, but that does not mean, by any stretch, that I will not be extraordinarily aggressive and relentless. And there is a fine line, perhaps, between the two. But I think I want to represent a district that actually does support that and calls for that and celebrates that. I think it's fair to say that the 3rd district is unique in that. Highly educated, engaged, thoughtful, decent. And if anything, we can be the voice that begins changing this as Democrats, and I intend to do so. I think we're probably saying the same thing, but I'll tell you, the word fighting bothers me. That's one reason I'm running for Congress. This is not about going to Washington to fight. This is about going to Washington and using the human spirit to engage in conversation, get to know one another, break bread, be human, and start getting back to what we are charged to do, which is to get things done for people. And if we start celebrating the success of getting things done for people, I believe we'll all do better. And yes, I hear you, and I promise you I hear you. And I will not lose this race, rest assured, for lack of intention and aggression, relentlessness, and hard work. I promise. I promise.
Just keep them honest, Dean.
Well, keeping someone honest is not the charge of the candidate in this
Right.
case, it's the charge of all of you.
But if you represent us,
You're here.
right?
Oh,
You
believe
gotta
me.
keep them honest. Yeah, hold them to it.
Truth, I started with truth.
Yeah.
Truth, justice, and opportunity for everybody. Those should be, I think, our core principles that we articulate. And look at this is not unique to Minnesota. This is the human condition that we all value and favor. So let's start using that and unify ourselves. We have an opportunity because of this president to do things that I didn't even think would be possible even as much as a year and a half ago. So let's use the spirit of hope and optimism rather than aggression and anger to achieve what I think we all want to.
Yeah, I'll let you volunteer.
I'll let them. Most of all, thank you. This is what makes this fun and inspiring, and I'm grateful that you could spend time with me this afternoon. My email address is dean@phillipsforcongress.org. I hope you'll share articles, perspectives, thoughts, ideas, criticisms, people I should meet, places I should go, because I love doing every bit of those things all the time. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming here.
Get a picture with Dean on your way out too.
Oh, like a,